Hello learners, welcome again to our biology lesson. We are proceeding with the study that we had started in our previous lesson, learning about the adaptations of plants to various habitats. In our previous lesson, we began by knowing what is meant by the term habitat, where we found that habitat is a specific locality with a set of conditions where an organism lives. After having known the meaning of habitat, a question ringed in our minds. What are the types of habitats? And we found that there are four major types of habitats: dry habitat, marine habitat, aquatic habitat, and finally terrestrial habitat. After having known the meaning of habitat, types of habitats, we were necessitated to know the meaning of adaptations, broad categories of adaptations, where we found that an adaptation is a feature, is a characteristic of an organism that increases its chances of survival in a specific environment. Say, for example, dry habitat, aquatic habitat, marine habitat, or terrestrial habitat. Allow me to reiterate. An adaptation is a feature or characteristic of an organism that increases its chances of survival in a specific environment. After having learned what is meant by the term an adaptation, it was therefore prudent that we understand the broad categories of adaptations. We talked about structural adaptations, which can be internal structure or external structure, anatomical, internal, morphological, external. How are those structures able to adapt an organism in a particular habitat? After having known that, we proceeded to learn about the behavior. Some plants shed their leaves, some fold their leaves, some open their stomata during the night and close them during the day. How are those behavioral activities make some plants to become adapted to survive in a particular habitat? Some adaptations can be physiological, process-based. Now, after having known the meaning of adaptation and knowing broad categories of adaptation, being structural, being behavioral and physiological, there was a need now to understand and to know types of plants which can be adapted structurally or by a behavior to survive in a particular habitat. Have in mind that we have listed the types of habitat. To remind you, we have dry habitat, aquatic, marine, and terrestrial. Now, we found that there are four major types of plants which can survive in a particular habitat. We have xerophytes, we have hydrophytes, we have mesophytes, and hydrophytes. In our today's lesson, students, you can predict what we're going to learn. Look at the background. You can see amazing plants. But one thing that is very unique is they are growing and thriving and surviving on a rocky, stony area. A question: how are these plants adapted to survive in such a rocky area? In most cases, we know that plants can do well in more fertile areas where there is water, but this looks anomalous. Students, it is not anomalous, it is normal, because these plants are adapted to survive in that particular habitat with those set conditions. Allow me share a screen that will enable us to understand more about xerophytes. What are xerophytes? Xerophytes are plants adapted to withstand a dry habitat or to endure conditions of prolonged drought in arid and semi-arid areas. How are they adapted? But before we looked at the adaptations of xerophytes, let us look at the examples of xerophytes. We have euphorbia, cactus, we have baobab, and aloe vera, and others. Let us begin with the structural adaptations of xerophytes. Some of them have got reduced size of the leaf, deep roots and superficial roots, succulent stems and leaves. Some have got reduced number of stomata, sunken stomata, and some of them have got leaves with thick waxy cuticle. Allow me begin with the structural adaptation. Beginning with the first one, reduced size of the leaf. Let us look at the first plant as displayed in the screen. We have this plant here. This plant is having leaves. How are the leaves structured? Leaves are needle-like and they are very spiky. They have been reduced in size. They have been reduced in size, as you can see. After being reduced in size, they have been modified to form spine. Why are these leaves modified to form spine? Or why are they reduced in size? These leaves are reduced in size to reduce the surface area exposed, thereby reducing the rate of transpiration and more water is consumed. This will increase the high chances of survival of xerophytes, since less water will be lost by transpiration and more will be conserved for various body uses. So we can say some xerophytes, for example, cactus, have got leaves reduced in size or modified to form spine to reduce the surface area exposed, thereby reducing the rate of transpiration and less water is lost. And on the other side, more water is conserved for the survival of the plant. We also have some xerophytes having deep roots. As you can see, this is a typical example of a deep root that some xerophytes have. So some xerophytes have got deep roots that penetrate deep into the soil to absorb water that is needed for the survival of the plants. And some xerophytes also have got superficial roots. What are superficial roots? These are roots which grow horizontally on the surface of the soil. Superficial roots are roots which grow horizontally on the surface of the soil, so that when there is light shower, they are able to absorb so that the plant may use. Therefore, we can say some xerophytes have got superficial roots, as you can see, to absorb water that has been allowed into the soil as a result of light shower. This will increase the high chances of survival of some xerophytes. Some xerophytes, as I had mentioned, have got succulent stems and leaves. As you can see, this is a typical example of a xerophyte that is having succulent leaf. And again, we have this one having succulent stem. What is the meaning of succulent? Succulent means fleshy. So these xerophytes have got succulent structures, that is leaf and the stem. When the leaves and the stems are succulent, it means they are having a lot of parenchyma tissues which are able to store more water that is needed for the survival. Now, how can we present our point in a good way that will earn you marks? You will simply say some xerophytes have got succulent stems and leaves rich in parenchyma tissues that store water that the plant is able to use during prolonged drought or during dry conditions. Let us look at the reduced number of stomata. Students, look at these two leaves. The first leaf is having 3 stomata, and the second leaf is having 9 of them. The first leaf, therefore, has got reduced number of stomata. By the way, students, back to Form 2 at the first topic, transportation in plants and animals. We were taught about the types of transpiration. We were taught transpiration through the lenticel. We talked about stomatal transpiration, and we talked about cuticular transpiration. So it means when there is high number of stomata, more water is lost by stomatal transpiration. So for xerophytes to survive, their leaves should have reduced number of stomata, which in turn reduces the rate of transpiration, and more water is not lost, is conserved. So how can we precisely present our point? Some xerophytes have got reduced number of stomata, thereby reducing the rate of transpiration and less amount of water is lost. Thus, the chances of survival is enhanced. Some xerophytes have got sunken stomata. The stomata is sunken. Now, as you can see, we have the structure of the leaf, we have sunken stomata, and we have substomatal airspace. You can see stomata is sunken. When stomata is sunken, as you can see, water accumulates in the sunken stomata. When water accumulates in the sunken stomata, diffusion gradients becomes lowered. When diffusion gradient is lowered as a result of accumulated moisture or water within the sunken stomata or substomatal airspace, it simply means there will be reduced rate of transpiration. So how can we have our point properly presented? You will simply say some xerophytes have got sunken stomata which are accumulated, accumulate water that lowers diffusion gradient and reduced rate of transpiration, and more water is conserved for the survival of the plant. And as you can see, we are having thick, waxy cuticle. We are having thick, waxy cuticle, and again, you can see it here. What is the importance of thick, waxy cuticle for the xerophytes to get adapted? They reduce the rate of transpiration. They reduce the rate of transpiration. Thick, waxy cuticles reduce the rate of transpiration, and therefore more water is not lost. So how can we precisely present our point? You will say some xerophytes have got leaves with thicker or thick waxy cuticle that reduces the rate of cuticular transpiration, and more water is conserved for the use by the plant. Finally, I want us to look at behavioral adaptations. I want us to look at behavioral adaptations. We have number one, reversed stomatal rhythm, shading of leaves by the deciduous plants. We have folding or curling, or you can call it rolling of leaves. And finally, one of the behavioral adaptations of some of these the xerophytes is short life cycle. Some of them have got short life cycle. Let us begin with the first one. Reversed stomatal rhythm. What is meant by this behavior known as reversed stomatal rhythm? This is a phenomenon whereby some xerophytes have their stoma or stomata closed by the day or during the day and opened at night. When stomata are opened during the night and closed during the day, that type of phenomenon or behavior is known as reversed stomatal rhythm. How does it help in reducing the rate of transpiration? Or how does it help some of the xerophytes to become adapted? When stoma or stomata are closed during the day, it means there will be less exposure to the sunlight, thereby reduced rate of transpiration as less water will be lost. At night, stomata are opened. When stomata are opened at night, transpiration will take place still, but at a very low rate, because at this time there is no sunlight to increase or high temperatures to increase at the rate of transpiration. How can we explain this precisely? And you say some xerophytes undergo a phenomenon known as reverse stomatal rhythm. That is, they close their stomata during the day and open them at night. This reduces the rate of transpiration and therefore less water is lost. Let us look at shading of leaves. Some plants known as deciduous plants shade their leaves. As you can see, this plant has shed its leaves, having many leaves shaved off. This plant has shed all the leaves. This is an adaptation to necessitate or to facilitate the survival of some of the xerophytes. because when the leaves are shed, there will be reduced surface area exposed for transpiration, and therefore more water will be consumed. Now, let us look at the last part of our today's lesson. We have folding of leaves. Some plants fold their leaves. As you can see, the leaves are folded. As you can see here, the leaves are folded. The leaves are curled. The leaves are rolled. What is the importance of having the leaves folded or curled for some of the xerophytes? This reduces the surface area exposed, thereby reducing the rate of transpiration, and therefore less water is lost and more is conserved for the survival of such xerophytes. Some xerophytes also have got short life cycle. How does a short life cycle help some of the xerophytes to survive? When a plant experiences short life cycle, that plant will evade conditions, and therefore there will be reduced rate of transpiration. Another fact that you can say about this is, when a plant has undergone a short life cycle, say the plant has given out spores, it means when drought comes, the spores will remain resistant to drought until that very time that the drought will disappear. Some plants produces seeds as early as possible. Some plants produce seeds as early as possible before drought comes, so that when drought comes, they can the seeds can be resistant to drought, so they can evade. Assume drought comes when the plant is still growing, is still as a gametophyte, still growing. The plant will dry up before producing seeds. So the plant is able to produce seeds as early as possible before drought comes, to ensure that seeds are produced to resist, to survive, to stay alive, to have a long shelf life. This will make these xerophytes to ensure that they are not affected by the dry conditions, and this will facilitate their survival. Now, students, that is the end of our lesson, and may God bless you. Stay safe at this time of coronavirus. May God bless you, and I want to believe that you have enjoyed my lesson. May God bless you. I wish you all the best.